Last time I said Happy New Year was in Kisumu and you were here.
Oh, exactly. Oh, yeah, we didn't see each other face to face.
Yes.
But this time around, we're talking about Somalia and how to approach this vast country.
Yes.
I think the best way is to take a look at the past, present and future. Let's start with the past. Ever since 1991, where the military ruler at that particular time was toppled from power, there has been civil strife in that particular country,
Yes.
with many arguing that, you know, foreign intervention in Somalia might be the core reason behind this unrest in this particular country. Indulge us into this particular comment, whether it holds water or not.
You know, Jesse, what's interesting today, it's quite serendipitous. I've actually recently received an excellent book by one Omar Jess, the roots of the Somali crisis, an insider's memoir. So he was basically a senior military official during the Said Barre time and then thereafter. And he's a renowned Somali of note who's documented this history quite well. Now, what I find interesting as you read this book is the problems didn't start in 1991. Somalia, from the beginning of the 1900s, was a country split between Ethiopia, Italy, and Britain. So from the beginning of the 19th century, they were a country divided, they were a country at war. Now, what I find interesting is if you look throughout that time, you can see two desires that run almost countercurrent to each other, but they run throughout the time. The first is the desire for Somali nationalism, and the second is the desire to still be established within their clan-based enclaves. And those two ideas seems conflicting, and therefore you can see that continue all the way to the 60s when they get independence. And you can see the guys who took over independence, they decided to form Somalia as a clan-based system. So essentially, they gave clans precedence over competence, clans precedence as a route to gaining power. So if you controlled your clan, then you had the ability to gain access to higher levels of office. And that threw away competence. And then, of course, that government was overthrown by the military. Then you move on to Said Barre, who again tried to enslave essentially the people of Somalia because he had curfews. It was essentially a police state. But one of the small lines that you find in this book that is interesting is that he decided in one of his edicts that Somalis would live in regions controlled by their clans. That means that the clans did not get to integrate, did not get to mix. So again, in their desire for nationalism, their zeal for having one united Somalia, at the overthrow of Barre, then grew this insurgence of various clan leaders who wanted to lead the nation. And so that's quite interesting if you look at it. Yeah.
And the fact that they've recently achieved, you know, that all-important central government,
yes,
it actually tells a lot about the clan-based leadership that is happening there. Let's take a look at foreign interference in that particular country.
Yes.
Still back to the same question.
Yes.
Does it hold water? Is Somalia a country that is trying to build itself despite foreign interference? And by foreign, let's take a look at regional bodies as well. IGAD, Kenya as well.
Yes. And you know, again, interesting because Kenya had the shifter wars with Somalia in the 60s for 3-4 years. Okay, so Kenya, Ethiopia, the West are seen as as external forces who wanted to impose their will on the Somali people. Let's also not forget that Kenya and Somalia suffered the fate of having our borders drawn for us arbitrarily, and that's why you find there are Luos in Tanzania. You'll find that there are Somalis, there are Kenyan Somalis, and there are Somali Somalis. So the shifter wars were based on that, again, Somali nationalism, and then Kenya's response to it to protect its border integrity. Of note is the first president refused to recognize the border of Somalia as permanent. So that tells you that Somalia's relationship with Ethiopia and Kenya has not been strained just in the last 2-3 years of when we are seeing bombings in Nairobi and things like that. It's been strained all the way to the 1960s, just about a border. So of course the Somalis fought against the Italians, they fought against the the British, they fought against the Ethiopians, and today you can imagine the psyche of a Somalian when they see those same flags coming to pacify their nation. And you spoke about the clan-based system. Again, the parliament is interesting. MPs are representative of clans. They are basically warlords. So what you find is Somalia is a hodgepodge of its past trying to break into the future, and then still being supported by who some people would consider enemies of that country. So for example, you can imagine a Somali whose father died in the Shifta Wars, for example, or you can imagine a Somali who was put in those concentration camps during the Shifta Wars, or who was killed by an Ethiopian, and then you see AMISOM. You see, so you understand how difficult then it is for the Somali people.
Well, thank you for painting that clear picture. But irrespective of how dark the past is, you know, we have to give them credit where it's due. They have a democratically elected president,
yes.
And the Prime Minister was recently in Kenya and actually thanked Kenya for being our #1 strategic partner
yes.
in the ongoing transformation in the Horn of African country. Let's take a look at the transformation right now as
yes.
we speak. You know, we well know of the other Horn of African nations, Ethiopia, who are actually pushing for, you know, closer ties with its neighbors, including Somalia.
Yes.
Is Somalia in the right path, irrespective of the fact that they actually declared the special representative to that particular country, UN, the special representative of the UN Secretary General to that particular country, persona non grata?
Yes.
Yes.
Now, you need, and that's a good place to start, because when you look at the history of Somalia, you understand that the Somali nation needs certain kinds of intervention, but they have to be very surgical and very precise in what you're doing. The first thing that you need to do is you need to make sure that the people of Somalia own their processes, which is why we have got relative stability now versus the past, because you cannot just roll in with an army and expect to win.
Yeah.
Because in Somalia, the army is the people. The people have been armed and involved in armed struggles for so long that if you shot a gun in the middle of a city, they would not be surprised, unlike Kenyans. So you're not going into Somalia to win a military war. You're going into Somalia to win the hearts and minds of people. And that's why the democratically elected president and his prime minister are key to that effort. So one of the things that AMISOM has tried to do is downplay its role and begin to empower the role of the national government, empower the police, empower the army, and then slowly begin to demilitarize the clans and to make the clans participate in the democratic process and feel like they're represented within government. Because again, the strife comes from the fact that they feel unrepresented within the structures of Somali government. That was in the past, but now that is happening. So that needs to be affirmed. But also, we must begin as a nation to tell the Somali people that we respect their nationhood, and that too, AMISOM is not there forever. We need to begin to communicate that message that Kenya is not coming here and Ethiopia is coming here to stay, because then it brings up the past and the history of that. And then let's also remember that because of the huge number of conflicts that they've had, then they've got a lot of people with military information, with military weaponry, with military tactics. So there needs to be, you need to work gingerly, because the toe you step on tomorrow is the militant against you a week from now.
All right. As we conclude, very briefly, the diplomacy aspect in that particular country. We well know Somalia is sort of different, and you mentioned it, you know, back then in the colonial days, having various colonial masters and the clan leadership as well in that particular country. Diplomacy in Somalia with respect to their recovery strategy. How should other countries approach Somalia, you know, in terms of trying to show that, yes, authority lies with the democratically elected president and the prime minister as well, who is supporting the president, but you definitely need our assistance in terms of, you know, food aid?
Yes.
Yeah.
No, in fact, not just food aid, in terms of security as well, because as a war-ravaged country, you need to be able to support their security structures, because you can imagine I'll give you an example. There are parts of Kenya today, in Pokotland, for example, where they have weaponry, where it is usually periodically difficult for the Kenyan government to sustain peace in such areas. So you can imagine how large Somalia is, and then you've got so many militant groups, and then of course you've got the effects and the ravages of terrorism.
Okay.
So the effect, the need for diplomacy and the need for foreign cooperation with Somalia is great, but it must always be done with the understanding of what the political dynamics of that place are. And that's why I really, and I'm not extolling the virtues of this book too much,
yes,
but this is one of the few books that I've read that give the story in proper perspective. And if you read the book, you will understand that there's a key component of recognizing the various clans that are there. Sort of the conversation that we're having in Kenya now about the representative of the major tribes within the executive and within our ministers and things like that. So any intervention cannot be seen to side with any of the clans. It must be nationalistic.
Well, the future definitely looks bright for Somalia.
Yes,
and Mark Bichachi, it's always a pleasure to have you with us, communication strategist and regional affairs commentator. I'll make sure I borrow that book after.
It's an excellent read.
Okay. Thank you so much. Always a pleasure. Okay, let's continue with the broadcast.